Hi, welcome to this week's edition of the Hot Desk Podcast. I am Melody Brew. I'm joined by Robert Kramer. We are both principal analysts, vice presidents and principal analysts. And today we have so much to talk about. We are going to be talking about a couple of events, actually. Robert, you were at this past week and a half-ish, right? AWS reInvent, IBM Strategic Analyst Day. We both attended the ServiceNow Global Analyst Summit, which was virtual. RingCentral's AI in Business Communications, that was a webinar, and also some really interesting some stats that came out of a study that they did that we can talk a little bit about. They haven't released the entire thing yet. We're also going to talk about some news, Google Gemini 2.0, and this is something new that we started last time, talking about a company that we think we're going to keep our eye on. Is typically we cover the big, large enterprises, but I think maybe you might agree with this, Robert, that there's so many kind of up and coming companies because of AI that maybe analysts weren't paying attention to over the years. And so I think there's a big opportunity there to kind of highlight some of these companies, whether they're not yet public or they're startups or they're maybe somewhat established. This one today we're going to be talking about has actually been around for a while, but they're still privately held. So anyway, that was a big intro. One more thing before we get in, we do talk about, we were just talking about privately held companies, but we do talk about publicly held companies. And so anything that we talk about on the show is for entertainment purposes only and should not be seen as investment advice. So with that big intro, how are you, Robert?
I'm good. It's we're wrapping up the year. It's nice to see the holidays here, family and stuff like that. So we had an amazing year. I know we're going to do a wrap up next week, but went to a couple shows or events in the last couple of weeks, like you mentioned, and it's kind of nice to see what the companies are doing and how they're gearing up for next year and what are their main focuses going to be for 2025, because I think it's going to be a little bit of a different year with a different focus on business outcomes for their customers.
I think that's completely right. And we saw a lot of that in just the discussions at ServiceNow, kind of where this next wave of AI is going to take people. I think next week it would be great if each one of us came with like our top 5 things for the year and then maybe a couple things we're looking forward to. But let's jump in. So AWS reInvent, that's a huge show. We had 4 or 5 analysts there, kind of each of them covering different sort of swim lanes. But there's also just sort of like a broad kind of overview of what was happening at reInvent. How was it? What's your big take from reInvent?
Well, it's a great event. They take over the city. It's the week right after Thanksgiving that Amazon does their reInvent. And they have an analyst forum, which I was at, and they actually have a customer one. They had about 60,000 customers, if you can believe that. And it's a chance for the customers to really see, what one of big vendor of theirs is doing. And the main features this time around, I believe, were about data management. How do you use data to accelerate your AI capabilities? And it was really honing back to kind of what we've been talking about all year is, AI is great, but it's not going to be able to take off unless your data management is in place. But goes even further back than that is these companies that are looking at their data need to have their change, management in place so they can exercise these strategies and have the people in position to do everything. But Amazon released some new products, which they, it's part of the course, but their next generation Amazon SageMaker, which is a platform that unifies data and analytics and AI capabilities, and it has a plethora of different types of capabilities. But it's a lot of the companies I'm seeing now are going towards a type of platform to unify the data, to bring the data into one area. And Google has their Google Cloud, Vertex AI, Microsoft has theirs, Databricks as a competitor, IBM Watson. So there's a lot of this type of trend that these companies are going to, but it's all about how do you unify the data And that's what I saw reInvent is this year to getting that business outcome for the customers.
I think, as we talk about kind of the priorities for next year, I think we're going to see many different companies, vendors talking about their data priorities.
Yeah.
That's going to be a pretty solid theme throughout, I think.
Yeah, I agree. But the thing is, I'm still seeing this, and we can talk about it more another time, but the vendors, I feel, are talking a lot about features and functionality versus what the customers are wanting to hear, which is the business impact. And I think that it's a gap that is consistent among vendors. But if I have all this data and I'm going to have this platform, I think that I need to understand why I'm even looking, or I need that platform for that business outcome. The practical use cases, which they did have at this conference, I think are really important for the customers of theirs to show a higher interest in what they have, or to delineate the differences between the different vendors, because I think the business outcome is a key functionality or key feature to understand the functionalities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's always helpful when you can see and talk to customers. And I think even for customers to talk to each other, because that's where, they go, like you said, kind of beyond the features to what the outcomes are. So after that, you went to Boston. You were in Boston with IBM for their Strategic Analyst Day. Jason Anderson was there with you too. So it's great to kind of hear the different perspectives on that. I know that as we were talking about, priorities for 2025, I think there's going to be a huge priority around data for IBM. So what were your big takeaways from their Analyst Day?
So what's really interesting is they had their partners there, like a Microsoft, AWS, and SAP. And the goal really was for them to explain to the audience, was the analyst community, how they're partnering. So, you build, you buy, or you partner. And when you partner, how does that help the customer? What's the benefit of that? And when I went back and I was talking a little bit about the business impact, this is what it's about. How do we, partner together to make these transformation projects work for the customer? And I think that, what's really interesting is the customer to understand how the methodologies work with what their consulting practice has, with Oracle or with SAP or with Microsoft, with AWS. IBM has a methodology that's called the garage approach, actually, but they actually are able to put together different types of transformation based upon what the needs are and what the impact is trying to get from each of those vendors that I just mentioned, because of the fact these transformations are extremely difficult. So they went through with all the different partnerships what they're doing for the customer and had use cases for each of them. And we went through all that for us to understand that. So IBM has a great approach, but still the change management was a key topic of the discussion, and how they're actually walking their customers through that. Now, I think they probably could have gone a little bit deeper into the change management, because I do think that's where most of these transformation projects are actually lost or fail, because of the fact that the change management's not properly set up or is not enunciated enough.
That's interesting. I see Adobe is doing that really well. They have this kind of value realization kind of framework that they're using with their customers, and change management is a huge part of that. And I think that's so important. And I think it's a little bit missed in places where there's the sort of this expectation that things are going to become easy for people. I've heard this too many times, and I tell people no, that's wrong. Where people say well, you didn't have to teach people how to use Google. Eventually,
Right.
AI will be like that, where it's just going to become second nature. It's more than that. There's so much happening with AI in across every industry, across every vertical. We're looking at some change management that has to happen. There's actually fear that needs to be overcome. And that's something nobody is afraid of search. So when somebody says, "Oh, it's just like Google," I'm like, no, it's not. Let's
Well, I think that's a good point because I don't think that change management's ever going to go away. I think the whole, AI is going to come more into effect with Industry 5.0, which is a cross between human and robot, where the humans are managing the robot. So the staff is managing AI to better the company, not to replace the people. So I
Mhm,
think it's the change management's going to set all that up. So it's not going to go away. It has to constantly be organizing and processing and changing the dynamics so they're working and training. And it should never disappear. But when that, if it's a one and done, it will fail at some point. These projects don't stop. It's a continuation. And I think the 5.0, the industry 5.0 is something that needs to be talked about a little bit more because it will take some of this fear out of it that we're not looking to get rid of 80% of the jobs because we put AI in. We're looking to improve 80% of the jobs, and then we're going to be more strategic and grow, and we're going to just not hire more people.
mhm. Well, IBM's gonna have to walk that back a little bit because the CEO is the one who came out and said, like, X number of jobs are gonna be replaced by AI. So I think that's actually a really good kind of segue into the ServiceNow Global Analyst Summit, which was virtual over several days this week. And I
Yep.
liked how they did that because it's, of course, I love in-person events for the part that you get to see people and you might hear conversations that weren't planned for you, that kind of stuff. But I liked the way that ServiceNow did this particular event because it wasn't 8 hours straight. There was like, there's some chunks of time. The Bill McDermott was present for the keynote, then kind of different chunks of time throughout the week, and that kind of enables you to, get your work done and also pay attention to the content, especially when you're doing something virtually. If you try to get people to pay attention virtually for hours on end, that's just not going to happen. But I think that's one of the topics that came up in the Q&A. Actually, a question I asked of their leadership was how do you envision people managing these massive sort of workforces of agentic AI? And the answer was it's something that they're very much looking at because they are looking to sort of humanize these agentic AIs, and that really has to be clear especially when you're talking about CX, because if you say agents, you might be talking about like a customer service agent, but these agentic AI agents. Um, but I really like the way that they kind of created this framework of where we are, um, kind of this like macro environment of like we have an aging demographic, we have sort of this deglobalization 1.0, climate change, AI policy. Interesting that they brought up climate change because I do think that people have pulled back from talking about that a bit until recently when it's all of a sudden like really hitting the data centers, and it is actually going to very much influence how people can innovate with AI if we don't start paying attention to this. But they talked about, kind of the changing priorities for CEOs. That's, talent shortage, digital disruption, increased customer expectations. That's been happening for years. That's nothing new. Um, and then the changing CIO agenda. So, they're really, I think like the CIOs just have to have this AI agenda, but then also just kind of modernizing through, like you talk about all the time through ERP and everything else, but and combining CX with ERP for better outcomes. SAP has been talking about that. And then they talk just about emerging tech. And, obviously there's a lot of AI in there, but then there's also, the more and more companies, more kind of mainstream companies are talking about quantum safe encryption, about robotics, even, VR, AR, what Anshul would call, I guess, XR, all of
Yeah.
augmented. He actually calls it spatial computing, and I think that that's probably the most correct term, although I think some people wouldn't know what you're talking about if you just said that. But I think what I got out of this mostly, I think, was just sort of how CIOs are sort of looking at their AI agenda, like kind of changing realigning their incentives with the business. And I heard this term at Cisco, and I think this is so smart, which is that people have to think beyond their org chart in terms of the business outcomes. And actually what, I would refer to as like selling your org chart, like everybody has to go beyond that. And so there was a lot of talk about that and these sort of agentic workforces, not workflows, workflows and workforces. But that's gonna be a lot to manage. I mean, think about like if Benioff has talked about Salesforce having millions of these agentic AI, let's call them bots just for the sake of like them actually working. I find this really fascinating because if they're going to have millions of them, one, Bill McDermott said, they take away the soul crushing work from people and let them do the meaningful work, which is great. That's what I've been saying all along is how we should be looking at this. But at the World Economic Forum last year, before we got to this agentic AI conversation, Benioff was talking about AI and how if it starts to replace workers, the government may have to come in and tax these.
Yeah, you were talking about that.
And so that's a really interesting thing to think about. There's also just this, whole conversation around how do you price these agentic AI agents? Is it outcome based? Is it use based? I mean, there's so many
consumption based
around this, right? And if you think about it in terms of employee compensation, those employees are going to cost you. They're going to be expensive in some cases. In some cases, it might not be worth it.
But my companies, the company's ready for AI the way that it's being promoted from the features and the capabilities. Where I'm going is a lot of these companies, I mean, they're on-prem with an older system, antiquated, and they haven't even modernized yet. Their change management, like we were talking about what that means to companies, they haven't even got through that yet to even get to data management, to even get to modernize and talk about some of the functionality. I actually think ServiceNow is in a good spot because they don't need companies to modernize to help them. Right. They can go fill those gaps with what they're doing and kind of glue it together. So they're able to work with or without the modernization that those companies are currently doing. And I think many companies, they might be a little bit further away from modernizing than you think. And I think the first step is going to be to go hybrid. So ServiceNow doesn't care. They can go this, that, or the other, and it gives them meaning any which way. And that gives them the chance to work with companies. And they talked a lot about the importance of data and how AI can help out. But I do think this is my gut is I think that the AI agents and using them, the trust factors got to be overcome because I'm not sure what you think. I mean, if you own a company and the AI agents are doing certain types of tasks, I mean, how comfortable are you that is that low, medium, high tasks? I mean, I'm sure the low ones maybe we're fine with, but maybe might not go too much further than that. So replacing people from a position standpoint I don't think as close to home as we think it's going to be as far as time frame, but eventually it will happen. So.
For some period of time, yeah. And I think, ServiceNow is in a good position to do this just because of how integrated they are. So I agree with that this isn't going to be like all of a sudden these things work like magic. I mean, they're going to have to be trained and guardrails and, all of the things that when you really do think about it, it is a whole new workforce.
Yep.
And you can't just set it free. It's like,
right.
I mean, you have to think about just, all of the agent sprawl.
It's part of the change management, though. Mm-hmm. It needs to be worked into that. Like you just said, like it has to be the company has to be trained on it. Well, that's part of change management. Do we want that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think, there's a lot that we're going to see, and obviously in the coming year, I think next year is going to look a lot different than it did this year. But, still, most of the research that I have seen is that people are talking about AI, they're thinking about AI, they're planning for AI, but they haven't yet gone full in. So I think, we'll see. Is that a year away? Is that 2 years away? I think it's, I don't know that we're, completely right there yet. So,
Gotcha.
but that, so on to the next topic, and that's again, a good segue because I like how those things sort of flow. I participated in RingCentral's webinar yesterday, which was AI in business communications. And that's where I think we're already kind of seeing the value. That sort of like one of the first things I think that people feel kind of comfortable with AI, right? The meeting summaries, these very like in communications. And one of the parts of my participation in the webinar was kind of to give my future outlook, which is that I have lots, I have a lot of opinions, this is a fun time of year for that kind of stuff. I've actually been like UC Today listed like the top 10 UC predictions for 2025, and I was included in that. And I like these where now people are kind of looking at what's the year.
It's fun.
Yeah, it is. It's good stuff. I like those, and I like being involved in these awards, like the Fierce Telecom Awards, and UC Today actually did some awards as well, is it really gives you like when you read these applications, it gives you such a good deep dive into the company. But that's a little bit of a tangent. But anyway, back to AI in business communications. Kind of, two of my sort of big takes on this is, one, AI is going to give us so much more data about voice. For a while, companies were kind of steering away from voice because it's really hard to capture all of that. That's that unstructured data. So, and it's very time consuming. So the customer service agents have to capture all the notes. They have to do all the follow up. AI just does that for you. And, and when it's done well, like we see, Zoom does a really good job of their AI summaries. RingCentral does a great job of this. That power of capturing what is actually said is, I think, will really help with certainly with customer service. The second thing is that sales teams, I think, are going to really benefit from AI in business communications. And that, I think, they're going to have to get a little uncomfortable, again, back to change management, because there's a lot of secret sauce that goes on in sales, right? Like people don't want to necessarily give away they don't want to train the model so that somebody else can use it. They want to keep those kind of secrets to themselves. And so there's got to be ways that people can kind of, one, keep those things sort of to themselves. And obviously there's, the data security issue of that within, leaving the company. But if people will actually take advantage of it, I think there's a lot of power in using AI in business communications for sales teams. RingCentral's solution is called RingCX for sales, and Zoom has Revenue Accelerator, which is for a sales team. It really captures, they're able to capture not just the information, but the sentiment, the follow-up, kind of even identify maybe potential targets that you weren't thinking of, because they'll kind of match it up to that, say, persona or that buyer group. So those were my big predictions, kind of my input. But the webinar was great. They had a DJ.
Oh wow!
Which was fun. His name is DJ Graffiti.
But that's not his real name, is it?
No, he has a real full name, but you can look him up as DJ Graffiti on LinkedIn. But it was fun to have, like, he's basically like a keynote DJ. So he knows the subject and what you're talking about, and he kind of passes it to, like, so John and Kristen were talking, and then they're like, oh, here, now we're going to pass it to Mel. It wasn't Kristen, it was someone else, sorry. But it was fun. He was cool. I liked that part of it.
So how many customers were there, or was it?
I don't know what the final count were. That it was a very active chat. Like, people were really, they did some polls, and then there was just the chat. They did it on RingCentral Events, their platform. It's fun, I think, to watch the chats. It's also, I think, it's not always positive, which is okay, right? Like, you can get, that's a great way for companies to get feedback. I don't like it when companies do these like webinars and podcasts and they don't allow the chat, because how do you know what other people are thinking? I want to see the feedback. I want to see if people,
that's the point,
if it's resonating with people. I mean, it's one thing, like, if you're on as a potential customer and you're trying to learn, but especially for us as analysts, I want to see the audience reaction. I want to see what people are saying and what people think of it. And
yeah, it could be a marketing tactic. Let's get some. This is our field testing. We're trying to find out if this is going to work or not. You have to do that to actually get through, to your end result. At the end of the day, I think that's absolutely right.
yeah.
So did you think, was it about customers and what their story was, or about new features and education, or what was the mantra?
It was one, they just finished doing, they're going to release it. They kind of teased it a little bit yesterday, but they are releasing a study that is about the kind of emerging trends and challenges in AI business communications. So it sort of does like this area by area exploration that talks about adoption rate, industry specific integration. So AI and customer interactions and sales process automation, kind of the rate of integration, how people are kind of seeing the efficiency gains, the benefits. So it was a whole discussion around that. It wasn't like a webinar for sales. Obviously, it's somewhere in the funnel, but it was more educational than targeted completely at a buyer. So I think, customers, potential customers, buyers, partners. There were several other analysts who participated. So it was a good event. I was happy to participate. Other than that, we have a couple of like quick news kind of things for the week. Google announced Gemini 2.0. There's a lot to unpack there. Kind of high level. What are your thoughts? Any like immediate kind of high level thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, they're expanding it. I think that's great. Like you said, they're getting to the agentic phase, or they're preparing for agentic. And I think that to embed it within their platforms and for their customers, I think they're definitely going in the right direction. As far as the capabilities, I mean, you probably know more about it than I do, but I think that it's, they're focusing a lot on how it could be used within their data management platform, and how it's also integrated with some of their other tools. So I think that they're trying to expand because of the competition, but also because that they need to as well. But what's your thoughts?
Yeah, so I actually I signed up for the beta. It's not out yet. I'm hoping that I get in. Maybe if they see this podcast, they'll be like, "Oh, cool, we'll get her in." I use Gemini. I'm a fan of Gemini, but I think there definitely are some things from an improvement standpoint that this is addressing. Definitely like multimodal outputs and inputs. I think just the kind of the speed and the like sort of the advanced tools, the capabilities. That's quite an upgrade. Have you used Notebook LLM yet?
No.
It's great. You have to try it.
Okay, I need to try it. Does it integrate with Gemini?
So yes, yeah, okay. And there were some things that they've talked about with the Gemini announcement with Notebook LLM. But there, I think the main thing is kind of what you said, which is it's shifting from information gathering to preparing for that, like kind of more, let's call it like virtual assistant, like it's not entirely like agentic AI, but more actionable utility. So where Gemini is focused on kind of organizing and understanding information, Gemini 2.0 kind of takes that a little bit more, like it takes it one step further to take action. So I think, it's just, it's already kind of, they're focusing it on search and in the Gemini apps. So it's also, Gemini 2.0 is powering some of their features like the AI overviews, the deep research, and then, like I said, like Notebook, LLM Notebook.
So when you're doing it with Notebook, what's a kind of a use case for it? You're just taking basically what your question is and the action you're getting through Gemini and putting that directly into Notebook LM, or it's already doing it for you?
You can take anything and put it into Notebook LM. Not, I think I said LLM before. It's Notebook LM. You can pretty much take anything and put it into Notebook, and it will give you all kinds of choices of what to do with it. And one of the big use cases is it will create a podcast for you.
Oh my God.
So it's somebody, I think it was Will Townsend who said this, that he heard a funny use case of it where somebody actually uploaded their bank statement into Notebook LM. And it
Okay.
created a podcast of talking about how they were spending money. And it was like so you can, it's, which I think is a great, for people that learn that way. People are using podcasts in so many different ways now for research, for, different, like my kids listen to podcasts about certain like health things that they're like interested in, or nutrition or whatever. So you can pretty much take anything and it will create a podcast for you to explain it to you. So anyway, we're going way over with that, but
Yep.
I think there's, I would wrap up with that. There's just, I think, a lot of interesting things that we'll see. I also think just Google has had multiple announcements this week, including their quantum chip. I think that this is the week that Google decided, like, okay, they're going to like they're showing up. They're going to say like, all right, people have, I think, somewhat underestimated like what maybe Google's behind in AI. So I think they showed up to kind of set the record straight there. So we'll see. But from what I've seen with a couple of those products, I've been somewhat impressed. So
Oh yeah, but you said you like Gemini. So we have a startup you wanted to quickly talk about, and we'll wrap up. But what's so special
yes.
about this startup, or not this company that you wanted
Yeah,
to
so
speak about?
I actually, I should know this offhand, but I don't know how many years they've been around. But I think they're in like their series, wrapping up Series B, going to raise Series C. So they are a startup, but they're not brand new. And I was introduced to this company at the Solidigm event, during their launch of the 122 terabyte SSD. They had several different partners and customers up on stage. Pat and I moderated this panel, and Ocient was one of the participants in the panel. So basically what Ocient does is they're like a software level that helps organizations like across many different industries manage kind of their high volume and more complex data sets more efficiently. So they do have like a pretty big focus on sustainability. But that comes from, a number of different ways, which is, kind of their consolidation and performance. So they help organizations to consolidate multiple data systems and workloads into a single platform.
Mm-hmm.
So, but they really focus on their energy efficiency and the ROI. So they are very ROI driven. They focus a lot on maximizing the energy efficiency so they're the software layer, and they kind of tell this like better together story, which makes a lot of sense. So they've been able to, in the conversation with their head, her name is Sophie Kane. She's their head of growth and I think business development. She was on the panel. She said that they have seen outcomes with their customers with as much as a 50% reduction in energy use by using this software layer. So,
wow.
Interesting. Definitely a company we'll be keeping an eye out on.
Yeah, they focus a lot on data and analytics. Is that the case? And okay, the thing is with them, and I think we'll see this in 2025, is a lot of the companies are pushing towards how they can get closer to the data to take advantage of all these applications. I also think, as we talk about the trends next year, is how these companies can focus on a smaller technology stack and utilizing these platforms like the AWS or like the Google, that they particularly don't have to go outside of that technology stack too far, so they don't have so many different technologies that open them up to the governance issues and the security issues. So what this company does, I think, feeds into kind of tacking on to some of those platforms.
Yeah.
So
They have, several different solutions, but I think one of the interesting things, and we probably need to do like a different full analysis if we're going to go so much over. But they really kind of address these sort of always-on industries, which is healthcare, retail, telecom. These are these industries that are ad tech was another one.
yep.
Where they are always on. So there's never kind of a lull in their, like the amount of data that is being processed. And so, but they also, those are some industries that kind of have these spikes. So they really help them to kind of have, I guess, what you would really kind of consider like a predictable energy bill, like.
That'd be fantastic.
That's important. So all right.
Uh,
Well, we went way over. We had a lot to talk about. I was sick last week, so we weren't able to actually do a podcast. So here we are. We'll do another one before the end of the year. And like I said in the beginning, we'll wrap up kind of some of our favorite things from the year, favorite events, favorite launches, favorite encounters. I don't know, whatever. We can kind of make it up as we go along. But anyway, thank you all for joining us on this 40th episode of the Hot Desk Podcast. I'm Melody Brew. This is Robert Kramer, and we really appreciate you joining us. Definitely hit the subscribe button and follow us, or hit us up on Twitter and actually tell us what you want to hear at the end of the year. And until then,